Hey, what are you doing?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Today when I woke up, the internet hasn't been working, as you know, and quickly before the starvation sets in, I decided I'll just quickly try and outline this history thing. So this is just notes off the top of my head. Come around and see. I've written here a timeline, and that goes all the way back to prehistory. Okay, and this is just me trying to chart it out. So I'll just show you quickly. Here we are today, March 2021. 2020 coronavirus, 2016 to 19 Brexit, 2010 to 2018 austerity, 97 to 2010 Blair Brown. Come over this way a little bit more. Stand over my shoulder, it doesn't matter. 1990 to 97 John Major, 79 to 89 Thatcher and Reagan, 60s and 70s, 45 to 60 post-war period, 39 to 45 World War II, 1919 to 39 interwar years, 14 to 18 World War I, 1900 to 1914, Victorian period, Napoleonic era, French Revolution, 1789. Also wrote industrialism, many advances in technology, many worsening working conditions for workers. There's the Russian Revolution in between the war years, the Russian Revolution there. Before the French Revolution, you got what I call, well, the colonial period. It's the exploration and expansion of Europeans. The American Revolution there in 1777. Obviously, you got the slave trade here going on in the background from the 1500s onwards. What else? The rise of the Prussian Empire is what led to World War I. The interwar years, you had the rise of the Nazis. After the Russian Revolution, you had fascism and communism and things, leading up to World War II. The rise of the American Empire from the turn of the century upwards, and then after the Second World War, you have the Pax Americana, which is the American century, and during that you had the Cold War, because on the other side of the American thing you had the Soviet Union, and that's where you had the Cold War going from the end of the Second World War up until 1989 and 90. And then obviously in our own period, 2001, 9/11 happened, the war in Iraq, the Age of Terror. 2008 they had the credit crunch, which led on to the austerity thing. During this time you had the WikiLeaks revelations with Julian Assange and Bradley Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden and that sort of thing. And then obviously we know that we had the Brexit referendum, which led on to the breakdown of democracy. And then we had coronavirus happen in 2020. I've got the tech purge happening in November 2020 to 21, and I call this period in 2020 the bonfire of liberties. Also in 2016, obviously you have the rise and fall of Donald Trump. What else? 2007 they invented the iPhone, and this is where you have the rise of big tech. And before that you had like Microsoft and Apple rising throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Silicon Valley was sort of established in the 60s. Obviously in the 1960s as well you have like the things going on like the JFK assassination, civil rights movement, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, leading on to like Richard Nixon, Thatcher, Reagan, all that stuff. We can go into all of these areas in detail. This is just me trying to rush it out of my head. In 1920 Saudi Arabia was established, and this is very important because there's massive ties between the UK and Europe and America and Saudi Arabia, all to do with oil. And anyway, where do we go from here? In the Victorian period and before the First World War, you had the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and this is the thing which leads on to Saudi Arabia and everything like that, because the British and the Americans basically went in and started picking in at the Middle East area in those early 1900s. Industrialism obviously changed a lot of big things around the 16, 17, 1800s. And yeah, before that, colonial period. So now I'm going to go on to the next page. I've written here British Empire as well. British Empire goes roughly from like the sort of 1700s all the way to the mid 1900s. So before that, I'm trying to stick to this kind of linear timeline. It's obviously very crude and you can add things to it all over the place. But now we're going back into history. We'll start with the English Restoration in 1666. The restoration of the monarchy after you had the Civil War and the Oliver Cromwell period in 1648. Before that you had the Stuart period, then the Tudor period, the War of the Roses, the Plantagenet kings, the Norman invasion of 1066, Anglo-Saxon England, Viking Britain, warring tribal England, Roman Empire, Roman Britain, which obviously can lead on to the Roman Empire, ancient Greece, Persia, etc., ancient Egypt, early biblical period. This is like Moses and the early Hebrew Bible and that sort of thing, the Old Testament. And then we got the invention of writing, going back further, stone cutting, etc., prehistory, which is like before any history, which is like the realm of archaeologists and paleontologists and stuff like that. And then before that, obviously, the enormous whole expanse of time, which was the evolution of life on Earth over billions of years. So you have the birth of Christ here, which was roughly contemporary to Roman Britain, about 2,000 years ago. That's year 0. And after that is AD, before that is BC. The Chinese civilization goes way back, like 3,000 or 4,000 years, and that was all over on the other side of the world. Over here you have like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great before him, and pharaohs. Like again, I'm just jotting. The Catholics first came to Britain in 590. Right. So from this period of time, this is where Britain and Europe largely became what is called Christendom, you know, Christianity. And over on the other side of the world you had the Prophet Muhammad inventing Islam, and then the Islamic Empire kind of wraps around the whole of North Africa and the Middle East and all that stuff. Moving upwards here you had the Crusades. The Crusading period is an absolutely crazy period of time between like 1090s and 1400s, and this is where Europeans, or in those days known as Franks or what have you, mixing with the Turks and the Saracens and the Muslims on that side, fighting over Jerusalem, the Holy Land. In 1570, you have the corrupting of the papacy, because the crusading period was all about Christianity expanding itself through the Pope, right? The Pope was saying, let's go on a crusade. But over the centuries, the papacy became very corrupt, and then that led to Martin Luther having the kicking off the Protestant movement, which is the beginning of the Reformation. And then you had hundreds of years of religious war between Catholics and Protestants all over Europe. And all of this whole period here is all wrapped up in religious strife between Catholics and Protestants. On the other side of the world, they start exploring. 1492, Columbus discovers America. The Spanish send in the conquistadors to take over all the gold and stuff like that from the ancient Incas and what have you. And obviously in this period as well you have the beginning of the African slave trade, which is a very important, massive part of world history. Exploration period, beginning of African slave trade, again that leads on all the way up to here into the colonial period, and then industrial period, and then you start having all these revolutions and things like that, and that's when we get into this period of history. Anyway, so this is like long history. This is closer here, that goes all the way up to today. Okay, and so then I turn the page. So this is the state of the world today. Now I'm going to redraw this again. This is just a note. I'm going to make this a lot clearer, and I want to put it online so that people can examine it. Probably you want to click on bits so it goes closer and you can see different things. Here we are, Blighty. Okay, you got the EU, Russia, China, Australia, Middle East, Africa, USA, South America, Canada. Now what I've written here, go down, all over this world terrible things are taking place. Genocide, mass killing of civilians, mass exodus of peoples from danger zones, destruction of rainforests, destruction of sea life, this is climate change, global warming, environmental catastrophe, etc. You've got the mass incarceration of political dissidents, manipulation of public media channels and censorship of information, widespread expansion of digital technologies, enormous expansion of satellite networks in space, dismantling of democratic systems, this is what I call the bonfire of liberties, wealth extraction from weaker nations into private corporations, and this is various means, offshore tax havens and inquisitive investors, but also it's just things like global capitalism, you know. I can go into that in a lot more detail. So the UK, for example, in 2020 has borrowed over £300 billion worth of debt from various international investors. So that means that we and our next generation or two are going to be in debt and paying money back to private companies for the next decades. And that's how wealth gets extracted from public into private. We have a multiplicity of activist groups and charity organisations, all of which are trying to solve the problems of these things. We have multitudes of impoverished people working in slavery. We have multitudes of ignorant people who are glued to the internet entertainment. The general distortion of truth and reality in the name of inclusivity, identity politics and cynical politically correct bullshit, aka wokeness, all for money. Because that sells newspapers and that's what drives click traffic and that's what everyone is into today. Nobody in this group, the ignorant masses glued to entertainment or people who are into identity politics and stuff, are even concerned about any of this because they're distortion of truth and reality, right? They've got a completely different set of outlook, a whole different worldview outlook. They think that the important things is positive discrimination in TV and this sort of thing, instead of getting to the root cause of all of these. To go back up here, I've written population 8 billion, that's double what it was half a century ago, right? The life forms of the earth are half of what they were half a century ago. So the growth of the human population is killing the rest of the life on earth, which has taken billions of years to develop, and we've wiped it out in 50. Right, now what you got? Where did I start? Let's just say here. So you've got a genocide is happening here, on the outskirts of China. A genocide. 1 million people are incarcerated, being forcibly sterilised and brutalised and stuff like that. That's been proven by the UN. That's called the Uyghur Muslim genocide. There's a genocide happening, there's multiple genocides happening here in the Middle East. One is happening to the Palestinians, and one is happening to the Yemenis, and this is something that we can go into in more detail later on. You've got multitudes of slave labour here in China and other countries in this area. Slave labour who make the products, the phones, the laptops, the headphones, all the digital stuff, all the gadgets, all the toys that we have over here in the West, all gets made here by cheap labour, okay? And what else? We got mass incarceration of migrants in North Africa. We have incarceration of migrants in England. We have mass incarceration of migrants in America. The refugees who spill out of all of these danger zones end up getting rounded up and put into prisons, because the countries of Europe and Britain and America don't want to take them in. So they end up in these jails, essentially, mass jails. And they're not criminals, they're human beings. You've got genocides, mass slave labour, incarceration. You've got dictatorships all over the world. Obviously there's a dictatorship in Russia, dictatorship in Korea, dictatorship in China. You've actually now got a dictatorship in England. An ongoing dismantling of civil rights and democratic systems. You have Julian Assange, who is essentially like a kind of a spokesperson for free information. He released the WikiLeaks stuff. He is in the maximum security Belmarsh prison in London right now with rapists, paedophiles and terrorists. Right, and all he did was share information about the crimes of this country. And that's WikiLeaks, and that's something that we can look into more later. But the point is that this is totally fucked, as you can see. And there's so much more to it than that. I've just done this very quickly. But this is basically the state of the world that I see, as I see it. And you know, it's gone way beyond where we were only a year ago. And then I wanted to bring this into it. So step back a minute, go that side. At the beginning of the lockdown, or very early on in the lockdown, I wrote this sort of, what do you call those? An acronym thingies. And it was like a kind of a whimsical prediction of the future. But you have austerity, Brexit, coronavirus, dictatorship, economies fucked, governments hurry in, joint kleptocracy, loving money, not ordinary people, question reality, start to understand videos without xenophobic yearning zeal. I wrote that a year ago, and I just feel like that's actually quite apt. And on the other side there's another version of it. It says, another bullshit conspiracy documentary explaining fabricated gobbledygook hardly increases journalistic kudos, lending more notorious outfits power. QAnon, ridiculous, stop these unbridled virtual wars. I couldn't think of anything for XYZ on that one. And then this was funny as well, I'll show you this. You can come around and look closely. This is just a bit of humour here. A little bit of my sort of weird doodling, scrambling brain. This, we have a face. Can you see the face? Yes? So he's like it's like the face of God. It's every man. Look at his eyes, the wisdom and the sorrow and the pain. You zoom in on his eye, and then you see a close-up of his eye. Yeah? And in his eye you see a ship in a writhing sea, in a storm. There's the moon, and the ship is being battered around by winds and seas and waves. There it is again, a little bit simpler, you see it? And then again, just a slightly further away version of the same thing. There's the eye. And then there's the ship again, close up. But it's not a ship, it's a mark being painted by a paintbrush. Right, and now we zoom away from the paintbrush, and there's a guy there, and he's writing his screed, painting his markings, he's writing his powerful thoughts, his evil intentions. And then you go back further and you see behind him, there he is, scribbling his malice onto the scroll of history. And then there's you looking in through the window. Like, no, what are you doing? And then down there's another you as well, trapped in the bowels, behind bars, you see? And then we go out from that as well. The camera flips around, or the viewpoint flips around. There's you looking in through the window, gasping, no, what are you doing? And there he is, writing, I will take over this world, I will do. And then we have you looking in from behind, you're like, no, I can't believe it. And there's him, and in the background of him you see the eyes and the face of the devil on him. He's under the influence. And then there's you, trapped in the bowels of hell, looking out the window, surrounded by demons, surrounded by evil spirits, and there your foot is being grasped by the evil claw, and you can't escape, and you're being dragged down, and you're shouting, but no one can hear you. And then there you are from the other side, railing against the rail bars of reality, unable to escape, and surrounded by demons. You've got religion in both of your eyes. And look, up your nose, a little pair of eyes. And then this one, we go closer to this one. It's a cave. We're going into the cave of your own nostril, deep into the darkness. What will we find? We come out and we're in a landscape. There's a road, a long road. There's a cross by the side of it. There's a moon in the sky. And on the cross is the corpse which has been crucified there years before, and these travellers looking at it, peering, wonder what's going on. It's like, oh, he probably did something very bad. And then we move on now. The stars are surrounding the sky, surrounding the moon. Can you see it? One of those turns into a butterfly. and the butterfly comes towards you. And look, the butterfly is reading a piece of paper. It looks like a newspaper. What's he reading? My God! Daily Flapper. Rectum exams made compulsory. And then... My God! Bunch of bullshit. This goes against the constitutional right not to have your bumhole fingered! And he's mad now. In his eyes, unfortunately there's a coffee ring on here, so it distracts it a bit, but his eyes have got these in. His nose is a frog wanking himself off. And his horn things, one of them says, "Scary motherfucker, don't fuck with me." Because having your constitutional right to not have your bumhole fingered violated makes one very angry. Anyway, again, I drew that very early on in the first lockdown, and seemingly quite apt now that we see how things have gone. It's just a mind unraveling. Yes. What do you have to say? Watch this.
That should be your channel intro. Do it like
Where
this.
am I, man? I can't do it on your face. I have to point it at the screen. Oh my God.
How's it doing that?
That's infinity, baby.
Whoa.
Come into my mind.